going to be talking about the recent changes that came in the 2025 edition of, SAP, JPEG, whichever you want to call it. Specifically, what we're talking about today are email and website compliance type things, the things that you're going to need to know relating to your website, your domain name, and your email. But I'm also going to touch on a couple of other things that are part of it as well, IT related. So let's get stuck in. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the updates that came in SAP 2025, the new governance requirements relating to email and domain usage and the best practices labeled under Assertion 10. I'm also going to talk about website accessibility compliance because there was a change last year, October, whether you were aware of that or not. And I'm going to also talk about IT policy because this is a new thing. So let's get stuck in. What is it all about? Well, the 2025 edition of Practitioner's Guide state in Assertion 10, the digital and data compliance aspect, councils need to operate from a council-owned domain name. You must own the address on the internet and your email address. It can't be on a platform that you don't own, you don't control. The website has to continue to meet whatever the current accessibility regulations are. We'll go into that. And it is going to now be mandatory for smaller authorities to have an IT policy. So starting April 25, councils with a turnover under 25k have got to adopt a formal IT policy as part of their annual governance statement. I'm going to go into that specifically later on today. But these are the key aspects. So what are we going to touch on today? We're going to talk about domain names, email addresses, we're going to talk about website stuff, and then we'll talk about IT policies. So let's get stuck into the technical words. Assertion 10, digital and data compliance. They added to clarify the data compliance previously covered under Assertion 3. Not quite sure how well you all know your JPEG or your SAP, but Assertion 10 is not going to appear on the AGAR until 25-26. By then, the authority needs to have taken, so when I talk about the authority, I mean you, parish, town councils. You need to have done the following. Your email management. So this is the element that I would say over probably the last 2 years, Aubergine have been very grateful but also proud to be part of the .gov.uk domain working group with what was the CDDO, the Cabinet Office, now it's DCIT, and we have been helping parishes and towns move over to be using a .gov.uk domain. But what's become apparent during that process is there is a little bit of a disparity in knowledge between email and the website address. So let's talk about the email. And there might be some basic descriptions here. We've got almost 200 people on the session today. So I'm going to provide a basic description. Email, your address where people can send you a message. There we go. I'm sure you knew that already, but there are lots of different types of email that parish and town councils, everybody uses. So specifically 1.47 email management says that every authority must have a generic email address hosted by an authority-owned domain name. So what do I mean by that? Well, look, there's a couple of examples there in yellow. clark@abcparishcouncil.gov.uk or clark@abcparishcouncil.org.uk. But not abcparishclark@gmail.com or abcparishcouncil@outlook.com. Why? Well, the important thing to understand about that is you don't own Gmail. Google does. You don't own Outlook. Microsoft does. And if you don't own that platform, you don't own the data. It is not within your total control in terms of the outcome. So one of the things that you're going to need to make sure that you do sooner rather than later is move away from using such and such a parish council at gmail.com. Because the data within it, the emails, whether that's to and from your principal authorities, members of the public, your IA, whoever, the data contained within it sits on Google's platforms, sits on Microsoft's platforms, and you don't have any right over that access. Yes, you might have the logins, but if you come into a council and let's just say the clerk exited without handing over the logins, you have absolutely no right to demand access. If you don't know the username and you don't know the password, good luck with being able to get into that, because Microsoft, Gmail, they don't have any responsibility to give you access to that. There's no legal jurisdiction. As I put there, you've got no legal rights over it. So getting access to it without logins is going to be almost impossible. Whereas if you own the domain name, it is yours to control where it points, who deliver those services, whether it's pointed at a website, whether it's delivering email via an email server, whatever it is, it's in your gift, in your control. And that is a key aspect. Because also it creates some GDPR exposures. Now, we're not going to be going into GDPR heavily today. In fact, not that much of it. My friend and learned colleague Dan Purchase at Breakthrough Communications is going to be covering GDPR aspects later on in the year. But specifically, if you don't own your domain name for your email, you've got almost zero rights over the data that is in it. And you've got to be able to control that. Now, you are no different to the commercial world or anywhere else, actually. Your inbox is where you keep pretty much everything. Now, yes, people back their computers up and they back the folders with the files, but honestly, how many times have you downloaded all of your emails and saved them to a memory stick or a hard drive? Never. People don't do that. But what happens if that account can't be accessed? You've got such a huge repository of data and information locked in your mailboxes. And if it's a Gmail, if it's a Yahoo or a Hotmail, you've got no right over it. But more than that, and that is a big thing, more than that, there's no authenticity of message. Anybody can set up a free email address. You could right now go off to Gmail and create a brand new email address and call it bobsmithparishcouncil@gmail.com. Obviously, you'd probably choose something that sounded a little bit more like a real place name. And you could, in theory, email people purporting to be a council. But there's no authenticity to that. It's a Gmail. You are, as a parish, as a town council, you are tier 1 government. Hardest working bit of the government structure, I might add. And so you've got to have some authenticity of message. So when you send an email out to, whether it's your principal authority, member of the public, the internal drainage board, whoever it is, coming from a council-owned domain name, preferably a .gov.uk, I'll come into the details of that shortly, adds a much greater level of authenticity to the message that you are sending and can be received by the recipient accordingly. The same goes for using the domain name on your website. Authenticity of message is a really, really key part of the domain name. Obviously, having a .gov.uk domain only your parish or your town council can have that. And the level of authenticity that you would have had to have gone through and security is a much elevated aspect. And we'll come into that in a minute. Now, I want to just go into a few of the other points that are part of Assertion 10. Smaller authorities, excluding parish meetings, have got to continue to meet the legal requirements for your websites, regardless of what domain, whether you're on .gov.uk, .org.uk. The regulations were written 2018 for compliance by 2020. They still stand. Specifically, the item 1.49 says that a parish or a town council's website must meet WCAG, WCAG, also known as Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, level 2.2 AA. These changed in October last year. Previously, they were 2.1, and there are some technical differences. And so if your website was built to meet 2.1, you will need to check to make sure that it's been elevated to meet 2.2. It won't happen automatically. Just as a point of fact, if you are on the Aubergine platform, the platform automatically meets whatever incoming level is required. We make sure that happens. So item 1.5, all websites must include published documentation specifically around freedom of information and transparency code for smaller authorities. You all know that already. It is reinforcing the point within the context of all things domain website related. And 1.51, all smaller authorities, including parish meetings, have got to follow GDPR 2016 and the DPA 2018. Like I say, I'm not going to be going into the detail of GDPR today. Dan will cover that in a little while. So lastly, and within the realm of this Assertion 10, the smaller authorities, including parish meetings, you must process personal data with care and in line with good principles of data protection. Again, these sorts of things you can wrap in a data retention policy, an IT policy, which we'll come to shortly. And then, of course, there are other aspects that relate specifically to the DPA. But lastly there, 1.54, all smaller authorities must have an IT policy. And we are going to cover what that means. But essentially, an IT policy explains how everyone within the council, whether that's clerks, members, staff, should conduct the authority's business in a secure and legal way when using the IT equipment and software. And it does encompass authority-owned stuff, hardware, software, as well as personal equipment, sometimes referred to as BYOD, bring your own device. So let's start at the top. We're going to start at the domain name, your address on the internet. So there you go, little snapshot there of my own town here, Leighton Linslade Town Council, or Leighton Buzzard specifically. There's the address on the internet, leightonlinslade-tc.gov.uk. And there is the email address. This is the publicly visible one, info@leightonlinslade-tc.gov.uk. They match perfectly. For the website address, that goes in the browser, Chrome, Safari, whatever it is. And your email address should match that. Let's talk about the differences, .gov, .org, and such like. The .gov.uk domain suffix, just like that example I showed you, leightonlinslade-t.gov.uk, this is only available to parish and town councils plus other central government. Nobody else can have that. It is the highest, most elevated level of authority on the internet within the UK jurisdiction. So it has an elevated level of security. The people who can set it up have had to pass a great level of security and process in order to be authorised to register and maintain them. Aubergine is one of them. There are only a handful of organisations who are authorised to do so, because it improves your compliance. It improves your GDPR position, specifically when it comes to things like FOI or SAR, so freedom of information or subject access requests. So here's the situation, and I'm sure you've heard of these stories before. Let's just say, as a parish council, you've got the clerk operating from parishclerkbpc@gmail.com, and then you've got the 7 parish councillors, they've all got Gmails and Hotmails. Let's just say the clerk receives a freedom of information or a subject access request. Unfortunately for the council, the clerk and the councillors, getting access to all of that information is going to be really hard, because the council has no right over the councillors' personal mailboxes. Now, whilst the clerk would be able to go into his or her Gmail address, all of that information isn't in a council-owned domain. It's in Google's domain, Gmail. So by having councillors and clerk, so all council staff, officers and members using a .gov.uk domain, means that the clerk or office team will be able to access all of those mailboxes in a fully GDPR compliant way to get the information to fulfill the FOI or SAR responsibilities. Not going to be able to do that if you've got members using Hotmail, Gmail, or whatever. You are going to be able to do that if the council owns the domain name, but it's on a .org.uk. So if you have clerk at such and such a parish council.org.uk and the members are using that too, then you will be able to fulfill those responsibilities. You will be able to access the control panel to get the information. You need to be able to do that. But by having a .gov.uk, you've got the added benefits of the fact that the people securing and running the network, right at the top, you've got the National Cybercrime Security Organisation who are filtering and checking, and they've got early warning stuff going on the domain network, and the heightened level of security that organisations like Aubergine have to pass through in order to be able to manage the .gov.uk network. It's more professional. It improves the authenticity of message, because only you as a council will be able to use such and such a parish council.gov.uk. Now, there is no specific requirement to have a .gov.uk. Let's make that clear. Historically and still recently, there is a misunderstanding. You do not have to have a .gov.uk domain. You have to have a domain that is owned by the council. There's the difference. Our professional and best practice recommendation is you do have a .gov.uk. But if for whatever reason you or council choose not to, the next one beyond that would be .org.uk. You can operate from a .co.uk or a .com, but they aren't really suitable for an organisation such as a council. .com is short for company and is the international, specifically American suffix. .co.uk, the co, company. Yes, it's within the UK jurisdiction, but it refers to more of a commercial organisation. Whereas .org.uk, you are an organisation. The .org.uk, .co.uk, .gov.uk, there's a whole lot of acronyms for us, they are all managed by Nominet. Nominet are the UK's body that manages our .uk network. So this is definitely the correct best practice direction of travel, but I would strongly recommend that if you are going down the route of having your own domain name, why bother choosing a .org.uk having a .gov.uk is the right thing to do. It's the best practice. Now, you can claim your parish or your town council.gov.uk address through Aubergine and other organisations that are approved by by DCIT. Right now, we are giving away a free .gov.uk domain name for the first year, which is worth 100 quid. And it is to be used for your matching email and your website address. So if we look on the screen there, if you aren't looking at the screen, if I ask you to look at the screen now, for parishes, this is an important thing to bear in mind. There are quite strict naming protocols for .gov.uk domain. You can't have what you want .gov.uk. You've got to have the place name, the place that defines where you are and what you are. Parish council, town council. So for parishes, you can have location parishcouncil.gov.uk or location-pc.gov.uk, which is particularly useful if you've got a long place name. You can also have locationparish.gov.uk. For towns, you've got a bit of a shorter you've got less options there. Location-towncouncil.gov.uk or location-tc.gov.uk, just like our own town here in Leighton Buzzard. For community councils, you've got the long version, I'm afraid. Location-communitycouncil.gov.uk. You can have location-cc.gov.uk. I won't go into the other suffix today that relate to specifically the Welsh addresses, but you are also permitted to have .gov.wales, .llr.gymru, and there is one other that I can't pronounce. So those are your options. And it's important to know this because before you go to council with this as a concept and an idea and a direction of travel, they must know within the boundaries of what the art of possible is. A lot of times we have councils come to us to say, council decided at last night's meeting that it would like lpc.gov.uk. Well, I'm afraid you can't have lpc.gov.uk. You've got to stick within the boundaries. Now, special cases can be made for specific versions where place names really just don't accommodate within it in a sensible way. But sticking within these realms is the way forward. Now, once you've got this .gov.uk address, not only will that be for where your website lives and your emails hang from, you can also use that address to access some central government digital services. There's some brilliant services out there. So, for example, free domain monitoring and filtering. You can access GovPay, which is a fantastic service. GovPay is a payment transaction service that you can have installed on your website to take debit and credit card payments at an incredibly low, in fact, it is the lowest transaction fee. It's 1%. And it's run by the government, but to all intents and purposes, it sits on your website. People can pay you allotment fees, room hire fees, one-off fees, whatever it is. And you can do that if you've got a .gov.uk domain. So these are best practices. Now, ultimately, all of this is going to improve your protection and your security online. So let's recap domains. You must have a council-owned domain for your website address. You must have a council-owned domain for your official email for the council. We recommend best practices to get a .gov.uk domain for best practice there. You can use other council-owned domains. They are acceptable, but just remember, if it's .com or .org, that data is outside the UK jurisdiction. And like I say, consider asking a .gov.uk approved registrar such as Aubergine. Start talking. Ask what the art of possible is. Also, you've got to understand whether you're going to be able to point that domain at your website. If the website's really old and it doesn't meet the accessibility compliance, you're probably going to want to address that first because pointing a .gov.uk domain at a non-compliant website is a problem. And, for full transparency, I know a lot of you on the session today, you've seen me talk before. You will all know that I'm a parish councillor of nearly 15 years in my private life. And just to balance that, to make sure that I'm not a wolf in sheep's clothing, I did actually take my ILCA last year, and I plan to take my SILCA next year. Look, some of these things are going to cost money. Can't avoid that. That's the march of progress. So start thinking about it from a preset planning budgetary point of view. Dare I say it, we're in June now. So budget planning, preset planning, going to start probably around about October, maybe November. Let's get it on that bit of paper now. And one last thing, your approved registrar, such as Aubergine, will make sure this happens, but make sure that the registrar of your domain name registers the domain to the council and not an individual. Unfortunately, an awful lot of occasions we have councils come to us who have a domain name, and the domain name was registered either in the ex-web developer who's now since decided to put a backpack on and go off to Thailand, or registered in the name of a clerk 3 clerks ago. And getting access and control of that domain name is a problem. But if you make sure that the domain is registered to the council, it is a council-owned asset. So I'm going to move on now. I'm going to move on to a refresher, because I'm sure that you're all up to date with your website accessibility compliance, but I'm going to provide a little bit of a refresher as to where we are with things. So the regulations, as you all know, parish and town council websites must meet WCAG 2.1 AA. That was 2020. Last year, October, rose to the 2.2 AA level. So your website must meet compliance, not just because it says so in the public sector body, but also it says so in SAP. And you are required to have a compliant website if you are applying for a .gov.uk domain. So there are 1, 2, 3 reasons why you've got to do it. You've also got to have an up-to-date and relevant accessibility statement. What is an accessibility statement? Well, this is a document that lives on your website, and it is organic. It changes because it is a reflection of your council's understanding of its requirements in terms of meeting website accessibility. It's you saying, we know what it is that we've got to do, and this is how we do it. And we've made sure our website and the content that we put on it conform. But we also know that there's some content that's going to go on the website or is on it that comes from third parties, and that is outside compliance, or it predates 2018. It's outside compliance. So let's call this a website confessional. This is for you to be able to say, we know we've got to meet these compliance levels with our website. This is how we do it. These are the things that we know are not compliant, or we don't need to comply. And you can contact the council here if you need additional support with accessing any of the content on our website. And you need to define when the website was last tested and how. That's quite an important thing. Now, that's why I said it's an organic document, because as time passes, the content, words, pictures, files, those things are going to change on your website. It's not a fire and forget type thing. And also what it is not is something that you go and you copy and paste from somebody else's website without checking it. I'm afraid to say that on more times than I care to mention, we've had a look at accessibility statements and it refers to other councils' names or other clerks' names, the source where it's been copied from. Now, not only is that a problem because it's not a compliant accessibility statement, but what's more worrying is it's a policy, which means it should have gone in front of council to ratify, which means if it did, clearly none of them read it because it had a different council's name and a different clerk's name on it. So these are really important things to bear in mind. So regardless of the type of domain name that you use, you are a public sector body, so your website's got to meet the accessibility compliance. I just want to mention about .gov.uk emails. Often you'll get members who, let's just say, kick up a bit of a fuss. I don't want to do it. Well, that is a bit of an administrative challenge for you, but if as council you decide to do it, then they must. There will be codes of conduct. But what we have heard happening is where councillors have got maybe a Gmail, maybe a Hotmail email address on their phone, and they are forwarding their .gov.uk email addresses automatically to their Hotmail or their Gmail because they've got it on their phone and they don't know how to add the .gov to their phone or want to. They must not do that because that .gov.uk secure email content is now falling outside of the realm of .gov.uk and disappearing off to Yahoo or Google or wherever. They must not do that. So what are the risks if you don't do any of this? Well, strictly speaking, you're talking about vexatious members of the public exercising their rights, and there are an ever-growing number of vexatious members of the public who choose to exercise their rights in terms of compliance here, there and everywhere. So could you be sued by a member of the public for not having a compliant website? In theory, yeah. Would it be an audit failure? Yeah, potentially. And if you are misusing the use of your .gov.uk domain, i.e. the website isn't accessible, or it becomes apparent that the .gov.uk emails are being forwarded outside of that, you risk the .gov.uk domain being withdrawn by central government. So those are some of the risks. So here's a few tips from an accessibility point of view. Ensure your website and the content that you upload to it, the documents, minutes, agendas, is accessible. Make sure that you keep an eye on your accessibility statement and keep it refreshed. Have a checking process for your web pages. There are some very good free checking tools. One of the ones that we recommend to people is the browser checking tool called Wave by WebAIM. It's free, it's available for Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox, and you can add it to your browser and you can go to a web page and you can press a button and it will tell you if there are any accessibility issues or not. Another tip, make sure that forms on your website are actual forms and not documents members of the public have to download. That creates a barrier because you are assuming they've got a printer. You are assuming lots of things. If you put it in a Word document, you are assuming that they've got a Microsoft Office subscription, which of course is a paid subscription. So you're creating a socio-economic barrier there. And you can't fill in PDFs. You can't fill them in. You can't fill them in on your phone, which is where most people interact with their council. It's really hard to fill a PDF in unless it's been made into a proper form and not just a PDF of the Word file that you created. Consider having forms as actual submittable web forms, much more accessible. I'd also recommend considering commissioning an accessibility audit of your website. You don't know what you don't know, but ask somebody who does. These are the sorts of things that Aubergine can do for you. You might like to consider commissioning a purpose-built accessible website. For example, we are giving away .gov.uk domains free with a fully compliant website starting from just £499. I said I'd be lovely and transparent. This is a Wave by WebAIM browser checking tool of My parish council where I am a councillor. There's the homepage. I've just run a check. No errors, no contrast errors. And those 4 alerts relate to the 4 meeting documents that have been added to the website. They're not fails. It's just saying you're linking to a document. Did you mean to? You could do that with your website. It takes 30 seconds. So some super tips. Avoid using tables where possible. Tables do not have any form of navigation in them. They are really, really hard for people who are loss of sight to navigate through. Always make sure that you add alt text for images that you add, and avoid embedding lots of text in images. When you do event posters, we can see them because we have optical sight. But if we don't see, and you put a picture saying there's going to be a summer fete in the parks at 2 p.m. next Saturday, if I can't see, how am I going to know anything about that? So put the salient info from the poster on the web page with it. Make sure that your website has high contrast, no pale greys, no pale colours. Sequential headings are something that you should know how to do. H1, H2, H3. If you go over to the aubergine262.com website, if you go to our blog, one of the articles there is how do I make sequential headings on my website? It's a translationable skill as well because you can use it in your Word documents. Use descriptive link text. So no more click here's. I've been lecturing on website accessibility now for something close to 7 years, and it is still one of the most prevalent mistakes. A lot of assistive technology will bunch all of the links on a web page together. So you end up with a page going click here, click here, click here, click here, click here. Click here to what and where? So use descriptive link text. If you are linking to the April 2025 Finance Committee minutes, call it that. Now, other links go to web addresses. Please do not dump URLs onto web pages because assistive technology that people with disabilities use read out web addresses one letter at a time very slowly. HTTPS : / I mean, it's an awful experience. So if you are going to put links to other websites on your web page, use descriptive link text. So if you are linking to your principal authority website, use its name, principal authority website, and put the link behind that, because then it's contextual and it's descriptive. It's going to tell the user where they're going. Avoid using overly styled text formatting. I mean those things that we all used to do on agendas and minutes, great big long lines of text in bold capital letters underlined. The members have been summoned to attend the parish council meeting. Da, 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 da. Whether it's bold, whether it's in capital letters, whether it's underlined, members are or aren't going to read it. But what it does do is it makes an awful experience for those people who use assistive technology. So reduce the number of that. And of course, underlining something on the internet infers it's a link, so don't underline it. And one last thing on these tips, do not use accessibility plugins to fix the accessible nature of your website. They will not meet your WCAG 2.2 AA compliance. They are merely a mask. And this is not just the view of Aubergine. This is the view of the disability community. Many of you who have seen me talk before will talk about an article written by Scope, one of the UK's one of the biggest charities for people with disabilities. They wrote an article a couple of years ago where lots and lots of people with disabilities experience these plugins where it shows a little person in a little symbol, blue symbol. Sometimes it's a very offensive symbol that's a person in a wheelchair. That's not descriptive of somebody with a disability. And these plugins just deal with surface level things, but they aren't making the website truly accessible. Please try and avoid using those because they are not a solution. So we're going to come now to the last part. We're going to talk about the other thing that you're going to need to include, an IT policy. What is it? Well, it's a formal policy that essentially centrally defines and controls the way that the council, staff and members use the software and hardware in a secure and professional way. Because as a local government sector, so many of our day-to-day operations are online. Emailing agendas, sharing documents, updating websites, social media, and all of those things that we do without thinking. But without an IT policy, it's the Wild West. There are no rules defined. And what happens is, when it goes wrong, when there is a councillor behaving badly, when there is a problem in terms of how communication channels have been used, maybe somebody's commented in a particular way that they shouldn't have online, or email accounts have been exposed and there's been a data breach. If you don't define these things in your IT policy, you've got nothing to fall back on. So this is really for you to be able to say, as a council, we use email, we have a website, we store our backups, we have a social media channel, we have this, we have that. We have these areas that we operate online and we store data. Another aspect of that is defining what you store and how long you store it, because that's going to fall under your GDPR compliance. Because without proper guidance, without proper definition, you are risking exposure. Data leaks. If you've got no IT policy and you have a data leak, what have you got to fall back on? Councillors might mishandle personal data. Absolutely, it might be an innocent experience. It might be a hack or the victim to a phishing link, something like that. Lost comms, where perhaps, as I said earlier on, lots and lots of emails between a councillor or councillors and members of the public about a particular thing, and those communications might be locked up in their personal email addresses. Well, you don't have any right over that. So those pieces of communication are lost. But unless you have defined proper operation, how they must and they mustn't operate on software and hardware in your IT policy, it's such a grey area. And of course, it's going to help you when it comes to regulatory failures or not, as the case may be, freedom of information, subject access requests. And something that everybody is at risk of, cybersecurity threats. We live in a world, particularly in the last couple of years, without getting too political, the global cybersecurity threat has gone up exponentially. Here at Aubergine, we look after 500-600 parish town council websites, and we have seen the cyber threat attack level triple in the last 2 years compared to the previous 5 years. Phishing attempts, that's emails that look like they come from somebody that you know or important, but isn't actually. It's being masked and there's a link on it. Somebody clicks the link, it installs a virus or gets them to log in and the logins are exposed, or malware or email accounts being hacked. So unless you define these in your policy, you've got nothing to fall back on. Now, there are some fantastic model documents out there. Your local council association, the SLCC, have got some brilliant IT policy model documents that are going to help you get started. But remember, every council operates slightly differently. You'll each have your own areas of specificity. For example, you might have CCTV, but the council next to you does not. So it would make sense to refer to the data that the CCTV captures in that if you don't already have a CCTV policy. So hopefully today's session, whilst quite technical, probably quite heavily technical actually, Hopefully, I've been able to explain it in a non-technical way.